Yeah, Chair, we're now live.
Okay, welcome everyone to this meeting of Transport for the North Scrutiny Committee. I'm broadcasting from the Royal Armouries in Leeds today, so I apologise if there's any background noise. I will cut the mic out when I am not speaking and when others are presenting. First of all, I'd like to welcome everyone, so thank you very much. I think we've got some new members today as well, but we seem to have an excellent turnout, which is what we require because we've got what I would call rather a substantive item at item 4. And I think that will be the main gist of today. And I've actually allowed up to an hour for us to discuss that. It's probably one of the most important items that's ever come to this particular committee in some ways as a result of comments by the government on October 4th. So let me get started. First of all, as I say, apologies for the late papers. And I know that you only got 2 of the papers last night. The reason for this is because a lot of the information in there is as a consequence of a lot of what I'll call moving parts that continue to move. And we wanted to give you the latest scenario and also get the best input we could from you. So I'll just remind you, this is broadcast live. So if you do need to have a cup of tea or whatever, please maybe consider blanking the camera first so that you're not a distraction to whoever the speaker is at the time. So Gary, first of all, I'm going to ask for declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest today, please?
Could I record that I'm a member of the York Bus Forum and the Action for Yorkshire Transport, and also on the Northern Transport Activists Roundtable, which is non-pecuniary, but for the record. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Merritt. It's quite a list. Anybody else? You can raise your hand, that would be easiest. Councillor Fletcher.
Do I need to declare that I'm Vice Chair of the Public Transport Consortium?
Well, we've got it
just
now,
in case
so yeah,
okay,
we've got you
it
now.
yeah.
So, and if we don't need it, we won't use it against you. Anyone else? Oh, okay, well, then we'll move to the minutes. Could I've read the minutes and I think they're a reasonable representation, but if somebody could propose the minutes, I'd be grateful, please.
I'm happy to propose them, Chair.
Thank you very much, Matthew. And a seconder, please. Okay, I'll second them. Thank you very much. Okay, so we're now moving to item 4, as I say, today's substantive item. I just before I hand over to Martin, our Chief Executive, I just want to just read a couple of notes that I've written in advance of this. So item 4 is one of the most critical items we're likely to have to review and help shape and give clarity to this document. It comes about as a consequence of the government announcement on October 4th regarding HS2. We need to consider the options in this paper and look at how it's going to be led and the appropriate governance and how TfN figures within that. The announcement on October 4th contained a great deal of change, and some of that is still coming into sharper focus. It's very easy for partners to pick out a project and say we can help on that, but not all the projects are out at the moment, and it is clear that there has to be a focus and a priority on delivering for the North. It's important that these actions are congruent with the future developments. There is also a matter of due process with the up-and-coming roads strategy and the rail strategy that's expected imminently. The paper presented by Martin, our Chief Executive, tries to map a path through these issues, and he wants our input to shape the final document that will go to the full board, with Section 8 being the recommendations going forward and 2.1 representing the framework that you might wish to consider this through. So, committee, what I would say to you is this is a very important issue, and Martin will be, I think, asking for help all the way through. So over to you, Martin.
Thank you very much, Chair, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. So thank you for the introduction. As you say, Chair, this is very much looking to scrutiny to help us. Your role as a scrutiny committee is actually really important in this respect. We are looking to take a version of this report to the main board on the 14th of December, and I suspect it will be a substantive item on that agenda as well. So your input into the recommendations and the way what the report covers are going to be really helpful. And again, as the Chair has said, please accept my apologies for the fact this is a rather late report, but as the Chair has explained, there is a lot going on, and I think that reflects some of the fact that since the announcement by the Prime Minister at the beginning of October, there has been a lot of questions being asked, and people wanting to understand how does this fit in with what's going on nationally, at a regional level, and indeed locally, and how does this relate to other programs that perhaps people are a bit more familiar with. So that's the intention behind this paper, and with your indulgence, Chair, what I'll do is just spend a few minutes just trying to help draw out the kind of key parts and the narrative that's in the paper. We start off by just reflecting that there has been the statement around Network North. It's a matter of fact that that's made it clear from government's perspective about the delivery of HS2 phases 2A and 2B. But it's also just making a point that, as the document itself sets out, what happens next needs to go through due process, and that will mean going through, in the instance of, for example, road schemes on the strategic road network, those managed by National Highways, it will need to go through the road investment strategy process. And the paper just notes that we're getting to the point where the next 5-year programme is about to be published in draft form, and there'll be a pipeline behind that. So it's trying to help yourselves and ultimately the board understand how what's set out in Network North needs to relate to things relating to the road network and indeed investment in the rail side of life. It's a matter of fact that, of course, those programmes in their own right are in at various times in due course subject to the impact of or the outcomes of various spending reviews. So I think it's just trying to remind ourselves that that's where we're kind of working. And then it also just touches on that in that opening section around that in the ensuing weeks there's been conversations about how does all this relate to what we do. It's just worth reminding ourselves as well that what wasn't included in Network North was some of the work that's already in train or about to go into train. So things like the Trans-Pennine route upgrade, which is best part of £10 billion worth of investment, improving the connection across the Pennines. That wasn't mentioned in the document. That's because it's a programme that's in flight. Similarly, the importance of the Midland Main Line electrification. These are actually quite significant pieces of infrastructure, and we need to kind of just remember that they weren't covered by Network North because they are in train or about to be. And then what the paper does is it reminds us that what we do at a regional level as Transport for the North, to some extent, sits beneath what is done at a national level by the National Infrastructure Commission. And it's perhaps actually quite timely, the fact that the Infrastructure Commission have recently published their National Infrastructure Assessment, number 2. It's important to remember that the work the NIC does is, in effect, commissioned by the Treasury. And it's worth remembering that in taking a 25-30-year time horizon, the NIC are provided with a financial envelope by the Treasury as to just how much, as a country, we're prepared or able to invest in long-term infrastructure. So trying to remind people that if people are saying, where is the long-term infrastructure plan, then we have actually got that in terms of the National Infrastructure Assessment. The paper touches on the fact that there are some really key messages in that for the North, messages that we've been developing and articulating for some time now as TFN. Things about the importance of closing the productivity gap, things like the importance of connectivity, both within our cities, but also between our cities, which is where things like Transpennine route upgrade becomes so important. So it's very much kind of saying, well, actually, there is this longer term national framework if people are looking for that, and it is set out by the National Infrastructure Commission. One thing for this committee and indeed the board to be aware of is that there is a reference in the assessment about the fact that the decision on HS2 came quite late in the process. And so the Commission is setting out that it will need to do some further work looking at the future rail needs in the North and the Midlands. And indeed, that probably chimes with where we would be, that if you think about the message we've had consistently in the North about the importance of transforming the North by transforming our connectivity. And previously we were saying the level of connectivity that HS2 and Northern Powerhouse Rail would be essential to delivering that transformation. Then what happens next is actually going to be quite important. And so we're working with the NIC executive at the moment to just understand their timescales for that work and how it might actually be taken forward, because clearly, as members will remember, we've got access to many of the models, and actually what we've got helps underpin some of the work being done on Northern Powerhouse Rail at the moment. I think in terms of the regional context, it's just a reminder of why we exist. We do exist to give that longer term view, evidence-based, the paper touches on. We've seen that with the Strategic Transport Plan, and Katie Day will just update you on where we are with that shortly. But remember, we've kind of grounded it in this understanding of what the economic, the environmental and the social inclusion aspects of transforming the North will be. And I think we've also touched on there about not to underplay the importance of the devolution we already have on rail through the Rail North Agreement, where we have the opportunity as Transport for the North to influence and shape the business plans of the operators Northern and Transpennine. And I have to say, my observation is that relationship on the translating strategic objectives into the business planning, working alongside the department, has, in my view, strengthened considerably over the last 15 or 18 months, a reflection of how we've kind of got better at working together to a common objective in terms of how we use that. So if that sets the background, what the paper goes on to say is we've had a clear view as Transport for the North consistently that delivering that transformation is important. When the Integrated Rail Plan was published, yes, we were disappointed about it didn't explicitly reference Northern Powerhouse Rail in full, i.e. what the board had decided and backed. But we did recognise that it was a stepping stone. What was set out in the Integrated Rail Plan provided some investment, started that journey, if you like, in terms of transforming, particularly the rail network, which we know from the work we've done on the Strategic Transport Plan, we need to double, if not triple, the role of rail in the North to actually achieve that connectivity. And we also supported the idea of the adaptive pipeline. So at the time, the Integrated Rail Plan had certain investment, but it had a recognition that over time, other aspects of Northern Powerhouse Rail in full could be brought into the programme at an appropriate time to get to that end state. So that's where we were with Integrated Rail Plan. And I think my advice to the board and to yourselves is that let's view Network North as a further series of stepping stones on that journey. There are some things in Network North which we really do need to be supportive of and recognise how government is actually helping move the agenda forward. So City Regional Sustainable Transport Scheme funding and that extension, really transport authority, that actually is something we kind of would be advocating anyway. The extension of support for BSIPs and reduced fares on buses, road maintenance. There's a lot in there that actually does help deliver, as indeed some of the bigger projects around Liverpool, Manchester connectivity, Bradford, the West Yorkshire mass transit system, electrification to Hull, which was originally, has always been part of NPR in full, being seen as now an opportunity to bring that into the main programme. That's to be really welcomed, given the importance of connecting down to the Humber estuary, as is the work around the major road network. So all of that, I think, is to be positive. And I think that's stuff that we can build upon. I think something for the committee to consider, and maybe in debate, Chair, is how do we take some of these things forward? Because it's great and it's right that we see the recognition about empowering local leaders, but actually is also recognising these things need to knit together at the scale of the North to actually deliver that transformation. And that's probably where we get to the section which is headed unresolved matters, because I think everybody's recognising that there's a lot of detail to work through still. And indeed, we're working with the department officials on that. And by the time we get to the board, I would hope we're able to give a bit more of an update there from DFT officials. But if we think about some of the big, truly pan-regional issues that we need to think about, and we need to have a way forward for taking forward things like, as I mentioned earlier, the point about HS2 and NPR is about improving that connectivity, not just within the North, but actually from the North to and from the Midlands and the South. So we need to have an alternative. We need to understand what is the alternative way of connecting those areas and having that level of connectivity. And so that, for us, I think gets us into the same place that many partners are across the North, where until we've got that alternative, we need to be protecting the safeguarding that currently exists. That's not to say we're trying to necessarily resurrect HS2, but if there's land safeguarded to enable infrastructure to be delivered, let's just be certain before its safeguarding is lifting that we understand that that's the right thing to do. I think then I come really kind of on a bit of a tour of the North, starting with places like Crewe, where the impact of the decision, I think, arguably has probably the biggest impact in Crewe and its environs. It's not just about HS2 as a station at Crewe, it's about the catalyst that acts as an economic regenerator, not just for Crewe, but its surrounding area. And we need to have some way of taking that forward, working with local partners. Linked to that, North Wales mainline electrification hasn't previously been identified as something, as a priority for electrification, but if the message here is there is an opportunity to invest in that corridor, then I think we need to be looking at how do we work with the Welsh Government to actually bring forward and identify what are the priorities. There are issues, I think, that we need to work through with partners again, but also more broadly about what's the future now, but what's the opportunity about Manchester and particularly Piccadilly Station. But there's also legacy things that were being looked at by HS2 around, for example, the alternative to the Goulburn link, which was part of the consequence of the Union Connectivity Review. Then we get on to some of the interesting things like the concerns that have been expressed quite widely by the business community about the concerns about, in the absence of the extra capacity that HS2 would have provided north of Birmingham, how do we deal with some of the pressures on the West Coast Main Line already around freight and logistics and being a mixed traffic route? So this isn't trying to look for the answers today, committee. It's trying to say these are issues that are pan-regionally significant, and we need to be clear about how we're going to work together to take them forward. Then you get into improving connectivity across the Pennines, not just the northern route, but the southern route, and the implications of what that means for Sheffield Station. Leeds Station remains an issue that we need to look at, as indeed, if we think about Northern Powerhouse Rail in full, making sure we keep the momentum around delivering Leamside Line and the rest of the East Coast Main Line infrastructure. Those are all key issues from a pan-regionally significant perspective. What it also says for me, Chair, is there are some broader, more general issues which come out of Network North, which is there's the issue about funding and skills to bring forward proposals, to do that at pace. And we know that many local authorities are under incredible financial pressures at the moment. So I think there's a conversation we need to have with government about how do we do that, and maybe one of the actions we need to do first is to, as we set out in the recommendations, say, work with partners to understand what the scale of that is. There's another issue around revenue. Colleagues on Rail North Committee will have had many conversations over the past months about the pressures on funding to deliver services. So there are some aspects of Network North where it talks about enhancing the rail service offer, which is something we would support because the evidence is clear. There is a growth in the rail market in the north on a scale perhaps unlike other parts of the country, and we need to grow that. But we also need to have the investment to allow those services to be delivered, and that's something we need to work with any government through. And likewise, as I touched about the union connectivity, some of the schemes that have been talked about in the context of the Network North are actually previously been talked about in the context of the union connectivity route and the possibility of studies. So those are more general, those last three, there's more general issues that for me come out of the Network North, where we need to work with partners and we need to work with the department on actually having clarity about how these things are taken forward, how they are actually kind of collectively maintained as an overview for transforming the Northern network. So what you've got then, Chair, is in the next steps, what we think might be a set of recommendations to be put before the board, but we would very much welcome the committee's views on that. You'll also notice there's a few points there about what we need to think about as the executive in terms of the business planning. My sense is that the work we can do as the TFN offer, where we're providing access to our tools and capabilities to support partners in developing proposals, I think that's going to become even more important. I think we need to maybe prioritise developing what I'm calling a new playbook on appraisal. We know that the current appraisal system still retains heavily the focus around the economy and economic objectives. And actually what experience tells us, if we look at Northern rail services, every pound that Northern invests in a rail service delivers £4.50 odd in terms of the economy, the environment and society. And we need to kind of get that really embedded in the appraisal framework. And I think that's where we can use some of the skills we've got at TFN to help develop that playbook to share with partners. And then there's an opportunity, I think, around smart ticketing and connected mobility, which builds upon the work we've been doing more. So those last three are more for us to think about as part of business planning. Chair, I know that's been a fairly long introduction, but I'm mindful, I think it was a late paper, but I wanted to kind of give people a sense of what the narrative here and where what's underpinning, if you like, those recommendations. But very happy to take views, comments, questions, suggestions on how we might, what we've missed maybe, and what we might need to change. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Martin. Before I move to questions, and I can already see Councillor Parish is off straight out of the blocks, so well done. Does anybody have any what I call clarification questions of what Martin said? And just while you're thinking on that, I will just ask Martin one of my own clarification questions. If part of Transport for the North is actually decarbonisation, have we looked into, or have I missed it, that not only is the market growing in the north, but we have to grow it to a certain amount in order, therefore the capacity's got to grow. So maybe that's something we should build in that says in order to achieve the decarbonisation goals, unless, as I say, I might have missed it, then this is the modal shift we will require. And therefore that also gives you a stat at some point. Anyway.
On that particular point, Chair, just it is there. It's implied within the work we've done on the decarbonisation strategy, because if you go back to that, it sets out a pathway to achieving nearly net zero by 2045. It sets out the scale of the challenge. Associated with that is work we've done on the future travel scenarios, which are a set of 4 scenarios about plausible futures. And I think the point you're making is hidden, not hidden, is in there, because under any of those plausible scenarios, we know we need to grow the rail offer by between double or triple. We also know we need to continue to invest in the road network, because the road will continue to be a key part of the transport system, and not just because of private vehicles, because the road network is what we use for public transport, buses. It's what we use for freight and logistics. It's what we use for cyclists. So there is evidence within the underpinning of the strategic transport plan. And then Katie would be far better placed than I to remember this, but within the outcomes being sought for the strategic transport plan, we've got those headline metrics about growing the public transport sector and maintaining and managing demand on the road network in a way that reflects actually overall travel will want to grow because we'll have a growing economy. And so it's actually quite a challenge, but there is a lot of evidence about the balance in there.
Thank you very much, Martin. It is actually in item 6, so maybe Katie will mention it then. All right, I'm going to open it right up to the committee, and so starting with you, Councillor Parish.
Thank you, Chair. Congratulations on Martin not using the word back of a fag packet for Network North. Got a few things. First, though, I mean, it just seemed very odd that it suddenly throws in different priorities, say for electrification, where early priority were given to Calder Valley and then Cheshire Lines as the ones that needed most doing. But my main question is really, what on earth does Network North mean by Northern Powerhouse Rail in full? I mean, you mentioned the impact on crew of cancelling HS2, but not Warrington, which of course was going to be central to the line from Liverpool to Manchester via the airport. And I know my colleagues will be wanting to add via Warrington to the bullet point in 6.5 about Liverpool to Manchester. But I was hoping you might say something about it, but you might not actually know what NPR in full means, do you?
Chair, do you want to take a series of questions, or do you want me to respond to questions one at a time? I'll be guided by you.
I suspect we probably should take a group, as I can already see 4 in front of me, 5 in fact. So let's take the first 3. So Councillor Firth, I believe you're new today, so welcome.
Thank you, Chair, for that. I am very new to this committee, but I know a little bit about rail. I've been around a long time. But thank you, Martin, for giving us that run around the north. But can I be a little parochial this morning? You did mention connections with the Midlands, and with a local problem, the Penistone line. Are you aware of that? Where connectivity is dire, and it takes 20 minutes longer than it did in 1980 to get from Huddersfield to Sheffield. It only wants 100 odd million to sort it out, and in rail terms, that's actually not a lot of money, is it? To twin track it. I just wondered about your views on that, please. And Calderdale line has been touched on, by the way, electrification, and that is much needed too.
Thank you, Councillor Firth. Sorry, Councillor. Oh, hang on, where have I gone? Okay, yeah, Councillor Fletcher, please. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. I think this is just questions at the moment, isn't it? So the question I have is, it was my understanding that the cost of HS2 were kept down by only sort of halving the cost of the part between Manchester Airport and Manchester, because of course that's the same track as the Liverpool-Manchester part of HS3. So with the cancelling of HS2, has that significantly increased the cost of the Liverpool-Manchester part of HS3, bearing in mind that virtually all the track between Manchester Airport and Manchester Piccadilly is going to be in tunnels, which is going to be at a significant cost? So has this increased the cost, the cancellation of HS2, of the Liverpool to Manchester part of HS3? Thank you.
Thanks very much, Rod. So there you go, Martin. You've got 3 questions. I think that's probably enough to keep you going for a minute or two.
Thank you, Chair. So look, in terms of what is meant by Northern Powerhouse Rail in full, the TfN board has been absolutely clear and consistent on that over the last 3 or 4 years, ever since it put forward its recommendations on Northern Powerhouse Rail. So that means the connections, not just between across the Pennines, but connections into Humber and along to Hull. That means that the improvements along the East Coast Main Line. It means taking that opportunities for connections between Manchester and between Manchester and Crewe. And I think the point at this stage, colleagues, is we know the level of connectivity that was that would have been delivered by the combination of HS2 and Northern Powerhouse Rail in full. All the evidence shows us that from a TfN perspective, we will continue to push the case for NPR in full. We need to understand what else is needed to give us the level of connectivity, as I said, not just within the north, but also the connections south as well into the Midlands and to the south. The point about Warrington, Councillor, absolutely take that point, and indeed, forgive me, it is a key hub in that. So we can reflect that in the paper. I'm going to just come on to the third question, then I'll come back and maybe ask my colleague Darren just to answer the second set of questions around Penistone and Golderdale. But on the Liverpool-Manchester, I think the short answer, Councillor Fletcher, at this point is we don't know. We don't know what the cost would be of that. We know we've got a cost envelope identified by government, and we need to work and support the mayors to understand what is possible. We need to we need to be clear about what outputs we need, what outcomes we need. I think I've heard both mayors be quite clear about their level of expectation, and we're going to need to work through this in a bit more detail. So I think on that particular one at this point, I think take what's in Network North as an indication of an envelope that we need to work within, but accept that or recognise that we're going to have to do quite a bit more work to actually put some numbers on that at some pace. Darren, do you mind picking up the point from Councillor Firth about the Penistone line and Calderdale? Because I think, if memory serves me right, these are kind of lines very local to yourself, as well as taking your role more strategically across the north. Darren?
Yes. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Martin. Yes. So no bias here at all. But I'm sat in Honley this morning, Councillor. So I'm literally not more than 200 metres from the Penistone line. I use it very regularly, and we have been making the case, together with colleagues from West Yorkshire Combined Authority to try and justify that second service per hour. So we continue to work on that. And it's perhaps worth saying that we have been successful with some funding being committed over the last few days for development work on the Penistone line. I think it's between 30 and 40 million that's been promised. So we need to make sure they hold people's feet to the fire on that to ensure that happens. But I think that however grateful and pleased I am about that from a personal perspective, I think that the wider point here is that TfN is working very hard with colleagues in West Yorkshire and with Mayor Bravin and others to make the case, not just for the big Trans-Pennine stuff, the Manchester to Leeds, but also for services as the ones that you touch on that importantly serve local communities. So inevitably we can't talk about all of the smaller lines like this in a forum like that we're in today, but that's not to say that we don't see it as being important. We had colleagues yesterday over in Hull on matters related to East Yorkshire, and I'll be over there later this week with our chairman. So we don't have time to go into all of it, but just if people can rest assured that we don't just focus on the big stations and the big lines.
Thank you, Darren. I think the one line I would take from that is that small services and small changes can make a big difference, and that we shouldn't lose sight of that. And maybe that's something you want to put into your paper, Martin. So now, Councillor Thompson.
Can I just ask you failed to mention Calderdale, Darren?
Sorry, Councillor Firth. You want to
Calderdale.
talk about
Calder Valley.
Okay. Martin, who's best to answer that one, Martin?
So I think the point about the importance of the Calder Valley, again, it is something highlighted in Network North document. It's something that we recognise as well. I think as Darren's touched on, what we're trying to do here is not focus necessarily on individual items or references in Network North, but it's about this general message. And I think, Chair, the point you kind of just touched on there is we need to weave into this that message which we have been playing back consistently, which is the rail recovery in the north has been consistently faster and stronger. So if we're going to grow, if we're going to kind of reduce the demand on the public sector, it is about growing the product, growing the opportunity, and recognizing that growing and investing in rail services actually delivers wider environmental and social benefits as well. Comes back to quite often the challenge we have in the north. The challenge we have is using the appraisal system that currently exists to best effect. And that's where I think sitting above all of this for me is the work that we need to do about developing this new playbook, using our knowledge and experience, working with our partners like Northern, who actually done some of that great work around understanding the economic, social and environmental impact of their investments, and using that to support the cases for that additional investment that delivers the additional services that then grows and helps deliver our outcomes in the STP. So I think there is something, Chair, in there about that narrative being weaved into what we put before the board, because I think that's an important message here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Martin.
Can we just come back briefly? It's not a question, just Martin, thanks for what he said about Horrington, but I think the main thing was when he said he don't know, because that's the problem. We don't know about too much of this. But he did mention about relying on the mayors. Don't rely on the mayors because they're fighting for their patch. And even in the metro areas, some of the boroughs know they'll be fighting for scraps. And there are a lot of places in the north not in metro areas.
Thank you very much, Steve. And you've probably summarised what I was going to say, which is by all means, people can mention parochial items, but I'd like you to mention it in the context of what the strategic impact is on Martin's report, because this report is about laying out a strategy in terms of the leadership and the governance and how we bring about all these different things in a way that is congruent and coherent and delivers over the next 20 to 30 years. So with that, I will now go to Councillor Dobson, who's been very, very patient.
Thank you. First, I'd like to say how much I appreciated Martin's contribution, which was quite enlightening to me. I apologise, I am going to be parochial for a minute and just make clear that I believe Transport for the North includes the far north. This is a non-metropolitan area here, and we referred to Transpennine, we referred to corridors. Of course, the Pennines ends in my constituency, and we have an important corridor north of the Pennines between Newcastle and Carlisle, an important corridor for rail and road. Similarly, there's another important corridor to the west between Carlisle and Barrow, which has also challenges with rail and road. You see behind me the background, the Great Corby Viaduct, which when it was built was the longest bridge in the world, late 1830s. There's not been a huge amount of investment in this railway since. I'm told by people who know far better than me that there's some low-hanging fruit up here in the north where with relatively modest expenditure we could dramatically improve the service on the railway and have a lot of economic benefit that comes out of that. So please, I'd like us to, in this large picture of strategy and connectivity, think about these two important corridors in the north. And final point I just make is, don't forget about the important connectivity with Scotland, not far away from me.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Oops. Hang on. Thank you very much, Councillor Dobson. I think I'll get it right this time. And Councillor Merritt, please.
Yeah, it almost follows on very nicely from that previous comment. The report obviously talks about working with others, partnership working and so on, references the Welsh Government in terms of the North Wales line. But there's no mention of working with the Midlands. And, you know, it was pretty obvious at the time of the HS2 North cancellation how personally committed the mayor of the West Midlands mayor was to that project. Given that this is about obtaining influence over government, I would have thought it was worth our while working with other regions to the south, as well as to the Scottish Government to the north, in terms of trying to maximise our influence there in terms of achieving our objectives, and particularly, obviously, the cross-regional boundary links. That also pertains to the problem with the appraisal network. I'm assuming it's not just a challenge for the north, it will be a challenge for many areas outside London and the southeast. So again, the import of trying to work with others on that to influence government to change the rules, I would have thought would be equally important, and both should be flagged up in the final version of the strategy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Merritt. That's well targeted. Councillor Salter, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I have a few points to make very briefly. So, if I can get my notes up. But right, so one of them is from October, when the announcement of the cancellation of HS2 of the various parts of HS2 and the one of the items that I did pick up is that the rolling stock was still due to carry on to Manchester and to other destinations. It does strike me that, from my understanding, the HS2 rolling stock was to be non-tilting, and so when using the West Coast Main Line, there's an inevitable sense in which it's slower than current rolling stock. To what extent does that impact on, or would that impact on to what extent does that reduce the benefits that could have on the rest of the West Coast Main Line, and to what extent has that been thought through? Next comment I wanted to make is I very much agree with what has been set out in the document that we have as a strategy. I'm interested in the North Wales mainline electrification as an item. That seems quite new to me, and I'm not sure whether I haven't been paying attention in the last couple of Transport for the North meetings, but I'm interested, where has that come from as a priority? That certainly seems like something valuable. But I was just hoping to learn a little bit more about it. The other comment I wanted to make is that there's reference in the paper, which absolutely makes sense, that where there is land that's been bought up, that the HS2 safeguarding should remain in place. In an ideal world, I absolutely agree with that. And to a certain extent, my assumption was, when we heard the plans for HS2's cancellation, that it would take time to dispose of the land, and that actually those sorts of things probably wouldn't happen before the next general election. I may be wrong, but do we have a sense of what the timelines would likely to be? It strikes me there is perhaps still a glimmer of hope that after the next general election there may be a reassessment of priorities, and that some of the HS2 plans that have been lost could be brought back. At the same time, it may be that that is gone, and there doesn't seem to me at the moment a huge amount of focus on reversing it that I might like to see. But do we know what the rough timelines are likely to be? And in that sense, would we need to, at what point do we need to decide really what our priorities are? And to what extent can we say, no, all of this land needs to be, and all this safeguarding needs to stay in place? How long does decisions have to be made about that?
Is that it, Matthew?
It is, thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I went
For
on
now.
slightly longer than I'd intended.
No, that's perfect. Thank you. I don't think you've missed anything on the electrification. Martin, please come back and take those 3 questions, and then I'll move to. I've got another 2 people waiting in the wings.
Thank you, Chair. And I think Councillor Dalton's quite right. If we need to strengthen that working relationship with Transport Scotland, and I think what I take away from the conversation here is actually being explicit about that. I'm very mindful of colleagues in the northeast often talk about how if you think about connecting Newcastle with some of its biggest cities, well, Newcastle to Edinburgh is just a connection between 2 cities, and actually we shouldn't be. So therefore, we do need to work closely with Transport Scotland, and that is maybe this is maybe an opportunity to reach out for them. So I think we can take that forward on board. Totally get the importance of the east-west connectivity. Indeed, we've been consistent, and we will continue to be consistently supportive of the A66 improvement. That is fundamental to achieving an improvement in connectivity across that part of the north. But the point's more generally about things like the Cumbrian coastline and what have you, and the services there. I think that's kind of comes back to my kind of general point relating to the Network North. It's, there's obviously some recognition within Network North about the importance of these services. I think that's where we as TfN need to use our practical experience of working through the Rail North Partnership, where we know that investing in these services is important, but it's making the case for that additional investment, the revenue investment to support the delivery of these services, where we do need to come back to some of that message about helping make the case for that investment in the services. The point about working with the Midlands is also taken from Councillor Merritt. The point about the appraisal, I think, just to reassure colleagues, we do work closely with our colleagues in the other established subnational transport bodies. Of course, we're slightly different. We're statutory; they're not. We also have the capability to look at some of these issues about how do we use some of the tools and the analysis ability that we've got within what we call our TAME team, the group of analysis and modelers that we've got. We're kind of uniquely placed like that. But that's certainly something I'm also keen to explore with the National Infrastructure Commission. I was at the launch of the National Infrastructure Assessment in Leeds a couple of weeks ago. And one of the points I said, look, this actually remains an area where we need to do some more work, and could we work together on that as Commission and ourselves, almost kind of bringing that regional level of detail. So I think that if we press on with it, we'll keep people working with us, but I think we're quite uniquely placed as TfM because of that capability to maybe just test that a little bit first sooner. And what I'm quite keen on is whether we can work with partners to identify 1 or 2 projects which we know are priorities, where actually we can kind of use those as test examples for exploring this, because I think my analysts would be quite up for that. I think in terms of responding to Councillor Salter, I think the questions you're raising, Councillor Salter, are actually some of the questions that we need to explore. I think all of this conversation at this stage has to be caveated that there are opportunities, but equally with those opportunities come a number of questions and issues that need to be resolved. So I'm very familiar with the conversations that have been going on in the technical press about Pendolino's capacity versus HS2 units, about you've got the West Coast Main Line is one of the most intensely used mixed traffic routes in probably Europe, and we're kind of how does that come? These are all issues that need to be worked through, being blunt, Councillor Salter, and that's where this is a start of a process. And I think the point, as the Chair has said, it's trying to present to the board a sense of a recommendation about how TfN sits within that, moving it forward, how that works with and supports what is happening at a more local level. And I think some of this conversation in that respect, Chair, has been quite good. On the particular point about safeguarding, I'm not right here, right now. I couldn't put a hand on what the timescale. I think the most important thing, though, is for there to be a very clear message from TfN that, given the importance of improving connectivity, and given that HS2 would have given us a level of connectivity which we know was going to be important for the north and for the connections elsewhere, we need to be working to have an understanding of how do we achieve that connectivity in a different way. And if we need land to do that, then let's be clear before we get to that point of land that is currently safeguarded being released. Let's be clear that we've gone through that conversation. Now, I've heard some commentators talk about arguing that that's a piece of work that needs to be done between now and next summer. I think it is something that needs to be done at pace, because clearly there's no sense in retaining land that is safeguarded if it's not needed. But equally, having got that protection, we don't want to necessarily give it up without having been clear it is the right thing to be doing. And I think that's where we need to work with the department. Chair.
Thank you, Martin. I've now got two more questions for you. So, Councillor Furley, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, while reading through the document, I noticed that there's no mention in our recommendations of giving like some strict timescales. Obviously, we can't tell government when we would like it done, but we would at least like to know when things would be done. Because just from the whole perspective, and I'm glad to hear that members of Transport for the North will be coming to speak to my colleagues in particular. Just from our perspective, we had the start of HS2 under Cameron, and it was something that was going to be promised, part of the electrification. Under May, it was scrapped. Under Johnson, it was brought back. Under Sunak, it's also been scrapped again. It's a bit of moving around, and it's that reassurance for local authorities, not just Hull in this case, but others, that there's going to be a strict timescale. Because given they didn't want to wait another decade for HS2 to be complete, for the complications that they saw or the financial issues they saw, it's needing a little bit more faith and trust in them. And I'm not sure at the minute we've been truly given that as a committee and for local authorities. So that would be one of the things. And keeping it very brief, Chair, something that's not really mentioned on here in particular would be, there's been talk from some of our neighbouring local authorities in the East Riding about the York and the Beverley line, having a look at quick wins like that where they could do it. They're not trying to go with a shopping list and try and ask for 1,000,001 things, but it's just things to keep in mind where we could have further connectivity in parts of the region which are quite divided or separated. I think just one final point, if the electrification is to happen, a time scale and date would be preferable, but also building into that, having a look at the changes to Leeds Station. That's one of the main routes that we use, as an end of the line station. And just having that sort of connectivity of, right, we've electrified the line, we've changed the station, and this is how it's going to help affect the rest of the services. I think it's that joint up connection and thinking that we really need to be enforcing along those timescales, or at least asking for some sort of timescale. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Furley. Councillor O'Connor, please.
Can you hear me? Yeah, thanks very much. Sorry about that. It's just really it's around the question about the Liverpool to Manchester connection. Did you say we have? I didn't get at the start where we have costs for a new link or an upgrade of that particular link, and what weight will be put on that particular link from Liverpool to Manchester?
Which route?
Thank you very much, Councillor O'Connor. Councillor Hornby, welcome back. I know you've been having some fun.
Thank you. Yep, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to say I'm pleased to see that transport-related social exclusion is one of the key outcomes in the report. It's often something that's so overlooked. I'm aware that at the moment there's a lot of public transport, particularly train and tram stations, that are not accessible to people with disabilities. And in the report it says Transport for the North will actively work with partners to bring stations in the North up to minimum suggested standards by 2050. Do these minimum standards include measures to make stations accessible for people with disabilities? I'm looking for things like wheelchair access and screens for people with hearing loss as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hornby. There's 3 questions for you, Martin.
Thank you, Chair. Again, really, really helpful conversation. And actually, I think it's a good opportunity to kind of make some connections as well. So if I might just pick up that the last point from Councillor Hornby, the Rail North Committee has been really quite, has stepping up the importance of providing leadership on addressing issues of accessibility. I know Mayor Burnham, as the chair of the Rail North Committee, has made it something that he wants to see the committee, and it's been very much supported by the entire committee, that fundamental point that if you improve accessibility it's actually about improving accessibility for everybody. If you deal it and you make it accessible for those who have particular requirements, you actually make it accessible for everybody. So I think what you'll see, particularly through the leadership being provided by the Rail North Committee, is that being one of the most important things moving forward over the next 12 months. And certainly, I know Mayor Burnham has been saying it's one of the things that he wants to be first on the agenda rather than to be second or even later. So I think hopefully that can be reassured. And again, Katie would be far better placed than I to go into the detail maybe at another time, but that whole work that we've done as TFN around understanding the extent of social exclusion because either people don't have access to transport or can't afford it, and it's quite often a combination of both. We're starting to build some of that work into the appraisal work we're doing for the department on the Northern Powerhouse Rail. So I think that comes back to my point. We're getting knowledge and experience of these things. We know that we've got to get better at getting them embedded into the appraisal so that it's part of our understanding. We're not just doing this for the economy, we're actually doing it to improve social inclusion.
That's great to hear.
Thank you. But please keep pressing it, because I think it's one of those things that the more it becomes the focus of our conversation, it becomes that sort of that rallying point which we can all relate to. And I'm just mindful of particularly, I quite often I like when you get out and chance to see some of the stuff. I know the new units on Merseyrail, the Class 777s, some of the facilities there that just make it easy for people with maybe particular requirements, or even just families with a buggy and some all of those things make it really, really important for accessible transport. Can I just come back to Councillor Furley? I think one of the things that maybe we need to put in here, and again, it kind of links in with later item on the agenda, Chair. As part of the strategic transport plan, we're saying that we need to get into that monitoring and evaluation. We're talking about having an annual action plan. And I think where Katie and I have been thinking this might kind of might become a role for TFN, you know, in the same way that the Infrastructure Planning Authority does an annual RAG rating about the status and the progress around some of the key infrastructure. Maybe that is an area where we need to think about how the role of monitoring and evaluation of the strategic transport plan helps us keep focused. And if there are still barriers that we need to tackle, how we work together and work, including with the government, to maybe addressing those barriers. So I think, Councillor Furley, that's the point maybe, again, we need to weave into the final report about the link in with the evaluation, some sort of role for the TFN board to kind of just take a stop, maybe once a year, on how things are going. Because, as you say, you know, things change, but it's keeping that transparency about how we're getting on. And, you know, if we're waiting for a decision, where does the decision lie? How can we help make it sooner? So I think there's some really good points in there that we maybe just need to weave into the final report. Councillor O'Connor, I think I'll come back to my point. We're so early at the stage in terms of Liverpool-Manchester. We know there's a recognition in Network North that this is important. We've always said it's important as part of NPR in full. There were different ideas, different solutions offered previously. What we need to do now is we need to work with and support the local authorities, see how we use that funding envelope to address what's possible, and I think we just need to kind of move on to working through some of the issues in a bit more detail now. But that again comes back, Chair, to the point you made. There's so many pieces of moving here across the north that actually maybe one of the things we need to suggest in the paper is the importance of TfN's oversight role. And I'm mindful, for example, we've talked already about how Transpennine route upgrade is about to, is really going to enter another stage of investment, £10 billion worth of investment. We kind of need to see this and talk about it in the same way that London and the South East talked about the transformation that Crossrail provided to the wider region. But that means that there's going to be a lot of disruption over the next few years. In the same way, we know that in the plans for Network Rail that are just being signed off for maintenance and renewals on over the next 5 years, there's a lot of work to be done on the West Coast Main Line in upgrading and renewing. And by the way, we've got stuff happening in and around Manchester. The point I'm making, Chair, is it's a network. If you start tinkering over in one area, you need to make sure that the rest of the network is resilient. You're not sort of knocking 7 bells out of the Transpennine and trying to do the West Coast and trying to do the East Coast all at the same time, because we need to have a functioning railway that can continue to support people and businesses. So I think that oversight and that role of TfN as the strategic transport plan and the sub-national body, the pan-regional issues, I think maybe that's, again, maybe things we can kind of touch on in the report to the main board. So I think that's been really helpful, kind of teasing that out, Chair.
Thank you, Martin. You'll be pleased to know that you've got 3 last speakers, and then I'll sum up. So I'd like to ask Councillor Parish, and then it'll be Councillor Fletcher and Councillor Firth. But Councillor Parish, please.
Thank you. I don't think you've dispelled me feeling about Network North being a bit of a back of the fag packet, but going back to if the non-tilting HS2 classic compatible trains are lower than Pendolino's, at least they'll fit better with the freight and the slower passenger trains on the West Coast Main Line. But I'd be interested to know whether you think the government has firmly committed to connecting HS2 Phase 1 to the West Coast Main Line, Handsacre or wherever. And I'm surprised that one of the major things in the Network North was a new station for Bradford, as if NPR was going to go via Bradford, as TfN originally proposed, rather than the integrated rail plan's curtailed version where it ended in the middle of the Pennines at Marsden, and then just using existing lines to Leeds with into an existing overcrowded station at Leeds. So I just wondered those two things, whether the government's committed to connecting HS2 to the main line, and what is this new station at Bradford going to do? Because it's going to be hard enough anyway to find somewhere to for it under the original plans.
Thank you very much. Councillor Fletcher, please.
Thank you. Yes. With regard to this item 2.1 little a, I'd like to add, possibly with an amendment, I'm not sure how to do it, where it says improved connectivity, but I'd like to see added and increased capacity. Because to me, you can't have one without the other. And I think the words increased capacity is very, very important. And capacity is the one word that's been missing for the last 15 years, when all people have been talking about is speed. And it's actually increased capacity we need, especially now from the Midlands to the northwest, because they say that the Handsacre link will be built, which is in the Lichfield area. But once the trains have moved off the Handsacre link, they're then back on the overcrowded West Coast Main Line. And we've still got we've got twin tracks between Colwich and Whitehouse, which is south of Stafford. So there's going to be no improved capacity there. So I just can't for the life of me understand how this decision has been made without just understanding the provisions and alternative improved connectivity and increased capacity then. Well, some people have advocated, of course, is, oh, we'll just widen, extra tracks on the West Coast Main Line already. Well, that means that if you're doing that for months, probably years, you're going to put in temporary speed restrictions. So instead of travelling at 125 miles an hour, you're going to be travelling at 30 or 40 miles an hour. There's also a 3-mile tunnel between Colwich and Whitehouse. And so for me, I don't believe we should be giving up. We should be fighting to have this HS2 fully completed. And whilst our mayors may have made some comments, I'm very disappointed from what I hear about the lack of objections from our northern MPs. I'd like to see them supporting it more. All I've heard is some northern MPs welcoming the fact we're going to have the £2 bus fare now extended with using some of that money. I also heard from our legal department in Cheshire East, and Cheshire East have put in for some compensation. Whether we'll get it or not, I don't know. That CPOs are still going on some parts of this route, and whilst the CPOs are going on, nothing can happen. And also, I'm told that if the CPO that has taken place is purely for HS2, without some legal jiggery-pokery or something, it can't be used for anything else. These are all issues that are coming out. So please, well, basically, can we please have an amendment put in that we include increased capacity on 21A? Thank you.
Okay, Rod, your point is well made. I actually have a note in my summing up piece, so I will bring that in there. And then finally, I've got Councillor Firth. I think you wanted to say something extra. Councillor Firth, are you there?
Yes, I'm here, Chair. I've just had news about the Penistone line. It's 48 million, which is brilliant news.
So you're happy? You've no question then?
No, I'm happy we've got 48 million. We're halfway there.
All right then. Okay, Martin, if you could take what I think is the questions that came through from Councillor Parish, and then I'd like to sum up, if I may.
Very happy to do that, Chair. I think actually I was just going to start off with the point by Councillor Fletcher. I think we touched on it earlier in the discussion about weaving into this paper for the board the point about the growth in passengers on the rail network. And I think that then would sit very comfortably with that suggestion from Councillor Fletcher. When we put this to the board, it should be about improving connectivity and capacity, because he's absolutely spot on. We've said it's about growing the capacity of the transport system to allow that improved connectivity. So I think that's a really key point, and I would be very comfortable weaving that into the narrative and reflecting that in the recommendations we put to the main board. I think in terms of Councillor Parish, I think we've heard my understanding, like that of Councillor Fletcher, is that the Handsacre Junction will be built, that they're looking at what needs to be done to make that connection to the West Coast Main Line. So that's my understanding. And in terms of Bradford, I think there I would just reflect that I think maybe it's because of what we've been doing as TFN, certainly with the efforts on behalf of the West Yorkshire Combined Authority as well. But Bradford, right from the day one with the integrated rail plan, Bradford has been a case where everybody's been saying we needed to revisit this. And I do reflect that the rail minister, when he was responding to the Transport Select Committee inquiry into the integrated rail plan, he was very clear at the time that he wanted to reopen the question about how we improved access to Bradford. And I think what we've then seen in Network North is that kind of openness from the rail minister and the ministerial team to revisit that original decision about Bradford. So I think that is all positive. I think we can't let up on it. We need to keep making the cases. It's about improving connectivity, not because we just like railways, but because we recognise and understand rail station and rail connectivity has a catalytic effect. It boosts the economy. It makes it easier for private sectors to decide to locate. It encourages greater access to labour markets, to opportunities for the community. So I take it as a starting point, a good starting point now, having that confirmed within Network North. And we are already working behind the scenes with DFT officials about how we start to put some of the evidence to support what will come forward in due course, working with our colleagues in the combined authority.
Thank you, Martin. I'm going to sum up what I've picked up from the last hour or so. First of all, everything that you've got in what I'll call under number 8, next steps, I don't believe anybody has objected to any of that. But I do think there's some extra pieces that I just want to reiterate. I think if we take it from, and you may want to rearrange these afterwards, but I've got a piece of paper here with lots of there it is writing. It does look like hieroglyphics if for someone else to look at it. However, the first thing is I think there's a view that we should consider that perhaps Transport for the North takes a leadership role within the governance and therefore the accountability, and perhaps providing coordination such that events, sort of at the moment it's very tempting. There's the Calderdale line that's got that money and somebody rushes in, but they don't take into account other things. So I think your point about the fact that it's a network and that the resilience of the network is critically important. I also think that it's an opportunity for measuring and monitoring and rag rating what's going on so that we know exactly where stuff is. So if you start from that sort of overall strategic point of view, then then also that network there, or the TFN, then coordinates regionally, either north, south, east, west, whichever way. But you also perhaps, and I know you'll be working together already, but it's not just about perhaps working together on trying to get things done, but actually what are shared challenges. So what can you learn from each other? And what can you share in order to deliver something perhaps more cost effectively, which I know the government likes. I think in terms of an overview, the first overview that I get is that the first thing is that this is about increased capacity, and this and just for, let's call it decarbonisation, the capacity has got to increase by between 2 and 3 times. So therefore the capacity has got to increase, but to help decarbonisation, but also it brings along a lot of social benefits, and I think the social benefit has got to be brought out there. I think a critical thing is that there needs to be lessons learned from the way the project management HS2 has been done. I'm not saying it's good or it's bad. I'm just saying there needs to be lessons from that. But not only that, is we need to look at that, again, picking up from what I've been listening to today, is what is the potential cost to, let's call it Network North, as a result of HS2 being scrapped? And, I think that's an important question. If it's going to put Network North up by 100 billion, have we saved anything? I don't know. I think also we need to have something about small services change can make a big difference. And we picked out certain lines where little things there can make a difference. Just tied with the growing capacity, it is about growing the product. And that by growing the product and investing, we will reap the benefits. And you can give the Northern example of every pound invested gives £4.50 in returns. And that's before you can get to what I'll call the social benefits, which was brought out by Councillor Hornby. I think there's a piece around economic generation, and and again, it was asked about timescales. I think we need to try and find indicative timescales, because we need to create certainty for the work, for when the work's going to be done, and therefore requiring that there are resources and skills in place to be able to do it, but also from a viewpoint of what I'll call direct investment. It not necessarily be foreign direct investment, but direct investment, so that, I know that Nantwich feels it's lost out by 2 billion a year because it doesn't have HS2. So, but if we've got a timescale around this, we can be looking at these different things. Then I think, and I think we need to be talking to universities, or let's call it education providers, to ensure that we are building the skills base that we need in order to deliver this. We have this problem sort of in North Yorkshire at the moment. We're trying to decide our next 20 years growth strategy. And one of the things we've got to look at is what skills do we need? And certainly I think that's important. I think the final thing that I would put on here is that I think we need to talk to the board about the fact that the whole North has to work as a team, and we're not all going to get what we want. And by slipping down the back door because I'm a mayoral authority and I have a link into Whitehall, therefore I can get my bit done first, isn't going to help. And I think there's something there that has to be. We have to be a team, a coherent team, and we have to be working for each other. And I think that's important. And if I've trod on some toes with that final statement, then so be it. But I do believe that, and I took the point very nicely that what are our MPs saying about this? This is very, very important to the future of lots of things. I could even say to the future of the environment, but it's certainly very important. So that's the sort of summary of everything I've tried to pick up from our very knowledgeable committee. I'm sure they'll write to me if I've missed anything, and I'm delighted, or they can write to Gary and tell him that I've missed something off and that you can include it, Martin. Thank you.
Chair, can I just say thank you ever so much for summing up in that way. That's been really helpful, and I think it reflects the richness of the conversation. And Scrutiny's done I think a really fantastic job on helping us shape this as how it goes to the board. So, Chair, if it's okay, thank you for that. And if it's okay with yourself, I will leave you in the hands of Katie and Danielle for the remainder of the agenda. But thank you very much, committee, for that input. It's been really appreciated, really rich. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Martin. You're welcome. Okay, so now we'll move to item 5, the Strategic Transport Plan update. Essentially, I believe that, again, this is around all the moving parts that no doubt Katie will briefly take you through, but essentially we're just being asked to note the paper here. I think that's fair, is it, Katie? Over to you, Katie.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so we had, when we met with you in September, we gave you an update from the consultation that we had done on the Strategic Transport Plan, and we've been working at pace to make adjustments to that Strategic Transport Plan. And I should just say that we've got Danielle with us now. Danielle Basson is on the call. I think many of you know my partner in crime on the STP has been Lucy Jakes. Lucy has gone off on mat leave, and so Danielle is with us now covering Lucy's role, and will be working with myself as we finalise the Strategic Transport Plan. We are almost done with dealing with all of the consultation feedback, but of course with the introduction of the Network North announcement, we are obliged under the regulations to ensure that we've given due consideration to current government policy. So having sort of spent the last hour and 20 minutes obviously discussing that position and where TfN needs to place itself and the views that it might need to take, we need to ensure that that is then reflected in the Strategic Transport Plan, given that that is our statutory advice to the Secretary of State. So our intention, having discussed it with the TfN chair and the vice chairs in the aftermath of the announcement back in October, was that it would be appropriate to defer adoption of the Strategic Transport Plan to March. So the paper is merely, as Councillor Haslam said, an update on where we've got to with addressing the consultation feedback, explaining that our need to undertake the assessment around Network North, and then subject to board views in December, we will then reflect that in the STP and expect to bring that back to the board in March. And I think that was really all we wanted to say on that item, Chair, unless there was any comments or questions from members. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie. Are there any questions from members at all on this particular issue? Councillor Salter.
Thank you, Chairman. Obviously, congratulations to Lucy. In terms of the document on item 5, on the sort of main issues 3.3. Now, I understand that it's really saying this is the current position and it needs to go for an update. It does strike me as slightly odd to have in the text that HS2 is required in full. I mean, clearly that's what the situation was, and that situation is gone. I just want to check that is part of what's happening is that is being removed. Am I correct in understanding that?
You are correct, Councillor Salter. So we, as Martin mentioned previously, the TfN board position has been for some time that we need MPR and HS2 in full. And that has been the position that features in the strategic transport plan. And actually, given the announcements on the 4th of October, we've therefore then got to decide what is the TfN position, which is the work that Martin's taken you through in the previous part of the meeting. So the intention will be that we then reflect that in the strategic transport plan. I don't want to preempt where the board is going to get to in December on that and what those views might be, but I think the rich conversation that we've just had will help us have that debate with the board in December, and that we will then reflect that revised position within the STP.
Yeah, thank you for that. I just wanted to double check that we weren't holding out a hope that HS2 might miraculously come back as much as, you know, one might quietly want that. But yeah, thank you for that.
I think the paper was intended, and we'll check the wording, was intended to state this is what we've currently said, and actually we now need to work out what we must say.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Katie. Thank you, Matthew. Councillor Parish.
Sorry, I'm going to disagree. I mean, if we've said previously that HS2 and MPR is required in full, we're not going to suddenly say we think the government's right, are we, to cancel it? So how that's phrased is going to be interesting, but I hope we're not just going to say, oh, you were right all along, and we shouldn't have ever said we want HS2 and MPR in full. That'd be silly.
So, Councillor Parish, I think that's really the intention of the work that Martin's just taken you through this morning, is to understand what the position is, and that we can therefore reflect that. I really wouldn't want to preempt where the board lands on all of this. I think what we've talked about this morning and the point about connectivity and capacity is critical here. The HS2 would have given a certain level of connectivity and capacity. And actually, while there may be some points that are addressed to Network North, I think as Martin's paper indicated, there's a number of areas that aren't addressed, and that actually we need to understand what the board's view will be on those so that we can reflect that within the strategic transport plan.
Yeah, without giving Katie a get out of jail free card, I do.
I think the chair may have frozen.
I think he may.
I know he's working remotely today, so it may just be a poor broadband connection, with the hope that he may rejoin us. I'm just wondering, members, if you'll be happy in the chair's absence momentarily, if we just carry on with the hands up to deal with this item. Is that acceptable to you?
Yeah.
Okay, so I think I've also got Councillor Merritt.
Yeah, echo Councillor Parish's comments. Certainly, I think we may have a change of government, although they've not committed one way or the other to continuing to support HS2. I think we should still regard that as an open opportunity, given the importance. Second issue is the issue around air travel and its massive carbon implications, and trying to actually get a set of transport policies that in effect reflect trying to actually minimise air travel and maximise surface level, which is much more can be with the necessary investments much more low carbon, particularly for short haul air journeys. So there's a reference to it in the STP implementation paper. There's a very guarded reference in this paper which basically recognises the conflict without actually giving any clear indication of where you're coming out on that. We really do have to face up to the real challenge that air travel involves.
So, Councillor Mary, we've attempted in the paper to give a brief overview of the state of play. What sits behind the paper, though, is our international connectivity policy position that went through the board last year. And one of the aspects within that policy position is actually about maximising the opportunities for surface travel, particularly for short haul. And it's been a theme that came through within the STP consultation. So we sought to strengthen that within the STP to bring more of what's within the policy position in that. And, if it would be helpful to brief separately on that, please do come back to us, because myself or Danielle could pick that out separately outside the meeting, if that would be useful. But it's captured in a wider piece of work that has fed into the STP. And I think you've rightly pointed out, as the consultation did, that needs to be better reflected in the document, which is something we've addressed. Thank you. I'm not sure our chair is back with us yet, so I'm going to just carry on to Councillor Salter again.
Thank you. If I could just come back very briefly to say, in response to Councillor Parish's comments, of course I agree that the government was wrong to scale back HS2, but the point I would just make is that in terms of the strategic transport plan that we have, it has to be based in reality. It has to be maximally ambitious given current government policy, and it can't be predicated on the world not being as it is. I'm very disappointed in where we are, but that's the point I was trying to make, and why I don't think it would be helpful to have much comment in the new strategic transport plan on HS2 in full, as it were.
No, that's noted, Councillor. I think, as I indicated before, this is about, we are required to have due regard for current government policy. This new policy has emerged in the middle of trying to finalise a strategic transport plan, which is why we're doing the work that we've talked you through this morning. You've given us that very helpful feedback on that we can continue to discuss with the board about what the ambition is for the North, because I think the one thing the STP has made very clear is that we need transformational change, and that requires transformational investment to address long-standing connectivity and capacity issues on our rail network, but across the region. So the STP is about that ambition for 2050 and beyond. So thank you very much. I can't see any more hands up on that particular item. I'm just checking the chat. I've noticed that Councillor Firth had to leave us. Members, I don't believe our chair is back with us. If you're happy to continue, I was going to suggest that we move into the very final item we've got, which was around the implementation of the strategic transport plan. If members are content, I can see a couple of nodding heads, I think.
Aye.
Excellent. Thank you, Councillor. It looks like we may have our chair back with us. And thank you, Councillor Connor. It says it's admitting him, but it's taking a little while. So perhaps I'll leave our legal colleagues to just...
Could we wait until he's readmitted then? I just feel slightly more comfortable. I think we ought to have the chairman.
I completely agree, Councillor Salter. It's unfortunately it's showing a time delay on him being admitted at the moment. So I'm going to just defer to my legal colleagues. I believe Gary's on the line, and Darren, what we should do in this position where we don't have a chair at this point in time.
Hi, Katie. I mean, obviously we don't have a deputy here today, so I think that...
Hello.
Oh, hi, Joanne. Could you advise us? Hi. We're trying to get Councillor Haslam back in.
I've spoke to Gary, and we don't actually have a vice chair for this meeting. So we've got two options. Either we wait for the chair to start, or you continue.
I think Councillor Haslam may now be back with us.
Hey.
Chair.
Made it. Sorry about
Chair.
that. I'm not sure what it was. I must have pressed something. Anyway, have we resolved that last issue? Has everybody noted it and we've moved on to the next one? Is that right?
We were about to, Chair, and rightly so. We were waiting for you to rejoin us to ensure that we were in the right place legally. So we're glad that you're here. So I will hand back the reins to you to introduce the final item.
Okay, well, look, thank you very much. And the next item is the strategic transport implementation, which, should I disappear, I again would just say that this is probably a matter for noting rather than anything else, because the item 4 on the agenda really sort of pushed a lot of things. What's put it back into the air while Transport for the North finds how it's going to manage this new situation. However, please, is it you again, Katie, presenting this?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So we have included within the pack some background slides, which we have been working on since the early part of the autumn. To think through the aspects of how the strategic transport plan should be implemented. Now, Martin actually touched on some of this earlier today, and I think it was probably just to reminder really, because we did touch on this again at the Scrutiny Committee in September. But if I just point to sort of slide 4, we believed that there were sort of 3 aspects of STP implementation that we were thinking about. So the STP sets that strategic ambition, as we've just been talking about, the vision we'd like to achieve, the strategic ambitions across economic performance, decarbonisation and reducing transport-related social exclusion, and it sets out the outcomes that we are seeking to achieve for the region. In terms of actually how it is then delivered, what we were talking about was sort of 3 areas where we've identified within the STP that we are now working on actively. The first, and these are all set out in chapter 6 of the STP, was those actions that would be required by TFN. So some of the examples that Martin spoke about earlier, the work that we do, for example, around transport-related social exclusion, how we build the evidence base, the work that we do through our strategic rail scheme in terms of supporting and helping partners as appropriate. And we had a set of actions that we set out in the STP, and we've been able to refine and evolve those with the feedback through the consultation. Those, again, are the original versions are included in your pack for information. The second point was being very clear on what some of those pan-regional priorities are that we would want to be engaging with Network Rail and with Highways Agency in terms of actually promoting what those key priorities should be. And that's work that Darren, our Road and Rail Director, is leading on with his team. And then the third element touches on what Martin spoke about earlier through the meeting, which is around system reform. So this was recognising aspects of the current way transport planning works, where perhaps it's not best serving the intentions and the ambitions that we've got in the strategic transport plan. And that includes the appraisal, as we talked about, perhaps a too narrow a focus at times, perhaps on benefit cost ratio, and a need for a greater focus on perhaps some of the wider strategic case, such as those social benefits. Network North actually has indicated already the opportunities for greater devolution to the local level, which was again something that we were very keen to support through the strategic transport plan, noting that greater certainty and clarity of those funding envelopes at the local level allows better management of priorities and interdependencies, as well as giving confidence for the private sector investment that would be needed to drive change and deliver. But also the benefits of how we can work together. And we've seen this most recently, I think, with our work around electric vehicle charging infrastructure, where it's not just sufficient to talk about where you might need the charging points, but it's also how you work with the energy providers to ensure that they have got sufficient electricity to be able to deal with the demand. And I think, as Martin touched on at the very start of his paper, actually seeing the recommendations coming out of the National Infrastructure Commission and their most recent second infrastructure assessment, again, supports that need to actually do more joining up at the pan-regional level to ensure energy digital is actually aligned with some of the other key policy levers that might be necessary, such as education, skills, etc. So we are working through some of those ideas around system reform with a view that we would provide advice to that alongside the Strategic Transport Plan when we go to the Secretary of State. So we wanted to just take the opportunity this morning to just share that bit of background, where the work has got to, and just to seek any immediate reflections. So I think really, Chair, that was probably where I'll leave it, because I had noticed you wanted to try and close the meeting by about 12:30, so I know we're a little over at the moment, but any feedback would be much appreciated or observations.
I'll open it up for questions, Katie. Thank you very, very much. I think that slide that you picked out actually really encapsulates what we need to do, but also the opportunity that perhaps, although I think there's a lot of disappointment around the virtual table here that HS2, etc., is not in its entirety. But one of the things it has opened up is the debate as to where the local level of control and administration, etc., governance of these particular projects is located. So I think that it's important that Martin also looks at that slide while he's compiling his stuff for the main board. Anyway, I've got Councillor Merritt, please.
Can I ask a question? I mean, we were talking earlier on the previous reports about the need to double to triple the capacity of the system over the next 30 plus years. How detailed has been the look at the implications of that, as opposed to, we've had the NPR proposal, which is one set of strategic additional capacity, and HS2, but presumably that will actually also have a lot of implications on the classic network in a whole load of different locations. We're obviously aware of some of the existing ones like Leeds and so on, but if there's going to be that level of increase in capacity, there's likely to be a lot of other places in the system where there are bottlenecks, or where basically the existing number of lines doesn't provide the existing capacity. Where is that work being done, or when is it going to be done, in order to have that strategic view of what needs to be delivered? And more, we talked about safeguarding the existing HS2 routes. Presumably there will need to be safeguarding of land to address a lot of those other capacity issues in due course. We know how difficult it has been for HS2 to actually deliver its route at all, and the northern links, because of the constraints of existing development and all the rest of it. So I just thought I'd ask that question, if that's okay.
Thank you, Councillor Merritt. I'll let Katie answer it, but I'd just like to give you a slight overview, because I've been connected to Transport for the North slightly longer than Katie, but there is some extensive planning and volumes, even tomes, if we were still using books rather than online, with a lot of this work in there. And I'm very happy to, I'm sure that Katie will be able to send you loads and loads of stuff. So a lot of work has been done on this, and the need to gear up. But Katie, perhaps you can just put Councillor Merritt's mind at rest.
Certainly, and I may just defer to Darren a little bit here, because this is probably more his area of expertise than my own. First of all, the ambitions that we've set within the Strategic Transport Plan around potentially a doubling or a tripling of rail use over the long term comes from the work we've done around the future travel scenarios, and actually what plausible future might look like, and therefore what that might mean in terms of rail use. But what also sits underneath the Strategic Transport Plan is our Strategic Rail Report, which has identified a lot of the key bottlenecks and issues on the network, and where those would need to be addressed, and where additional capacity might need to be provided. It points to, for example, some of the Restoring Your Railways schemes as well. So there is a whole stack of evidence and work that does sit behind where we believe the rail network needs to be in the future. But I'm just going to invite Darren to just say, is there anything more that we'd want to point to at this point without perhaps, offering a separate briefing for the councillor, if that would be helpful, really, because I'm conscious there is, as the chair has said, a wealth of evidence that sits underneath all of this.
Yeah, thank you, Katie. And just I guess to try and respond to that, it's a really great question from the councillor, and I think really the answer is sort of in the question, that what we're looking to do here is to actually expose this to the light. That I'm sure no one on this call would dispute that sort of doubling or tripling sort of rail freight across the north and across the UK would be a good thing to do. But what we have to do is then set that in the context of, well, if that's what we want to do, what other things have to happen? And very often, I spend much of my time in, meetings with DFT or Network Rail or whoever it is, where we're having to balance between, it could be this service or that service in terms of passenger services. And we need to bring freight much more into the mix. And the work is there and it's sat behind all of this. But, I think what we will all see over the coming months and years is that our rail networks are hideously constrained. We all know that. And there are some difficult choices to make. And the idea that we can keep squeezing more and more through the same infrastructure, it's just not a viable proposition. And we're trying to expose that a little more. So hopefully that gives a sense of direction in terms of how we'd like to try and deal with this over the coming months.
Thank you very much, Darren. That helps. Councillor Merritt, are you satisfied?
Yeah, that sounds very positive from what you said. It would be helpful if someone could send me some links to have a look at that. But pleased to hear that work's being done, but also continuing. Thank you.
Yeah. Be careful what you wish for, is all I would say. Are there any other questions for Katie on this particular item? I'm not seeing any questions. Therefore, I think I will close the meeting. I will just mention that the next meeting is actually in person, so we'll be expecting no holograms, and hopefully I won't just disappear. And it's going to be on the 27th of February, and it's going to be in Manchester City Council Town Hall Extension, which I hope is not just a porter cabin. And so look, I'd like to thank you all for coming today, and I would like to thank you all for that very, very good intervention over the item 4 in particular. I know it was causing quite a lot of concern as to how it could be phrased, etc. And I think there's been some valuable questions and some angles that, when you come from a parochial end, actually provide a strategic viewpoint. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you,
Chair. I'm just going to leave you. Go on, sorry. Yes.
Town Hall Extension at Manchester, I think, is a Grade 1 listed building. So.
Okay, well that sounds promising. Chair, it's actually the new TFN office. We're occupying space now, and you're right. It's a lovely building. We've been in here since September, so we look forward to welcoming you. And it's a really nice space as well for the meeting. So we'll see you in person next time.
Okay, well that's excellent. So thank you very much. And I'm just going to leave you with one thought for the day, which I think I'm going to credit Darren with, which is, and perhaps we all have to think about this as councillors or politicians, what other things have to happen for